So Square Enix isn't doing so hot, everyone. If you have kept up with their recent history, you may know that they've had quite a few AAA flops these past few months and years. And then there's Final Fantasy XVI, which by no means was a sales flop, but it didn't sell so well that it made up for Square Enix's past failures. So on June 28th, 2023, it was announced that the game sold 3 million copies within its first week, which Square Enix seemed happy about. But when you look at overall sales over the long term, Takashi Mochizuki highlighted that Final Fantasy XVI second week sales tumbled in Japan. And generally in Japan, Final Fantasy XVI didn't do as well as the game did internationally. 90% down for week 2, reads this tweet right here that spotlighted Famitsu estimates. And analysts described it as very tough result, considering that this is Final Fantasy and Japan's performance was expected to just do better than it really did. And Takashi highlighted that Square Enix deciding to launch the game as PS5 exclusive on June 22nd when it was a super busy period for AAA games and at $70 didn't really help matters to make FF16 exceed sales expectations rather than just kind of coast on, what is in line with what Square Enix was expecting, but they were also hoping that the game would just really take off to make up for those past failures, and that's just not happening right now. And so it was stated right here that according to analysts who attended Square Enix's earnings call, President Kiryu said FF16 sales didn't meet the high end of the company's expectations, and PS5's installment base was a limiting factor. The end result was that as of August of 2023, we saw the company's stock go down by as much as 15%, in large part because the company's profits were down by a significant amount. Company's dour earnings report showed 79% profit drop. Final Fantasy XVI not meeting Square Enix's high-end sales expectations meant that the game couldn't make up for Marvel's Avengers being a complete disaster. This game, by the way, is closing down very soon. It is 90% off right now, in fact, and that offer ends on September 30th, which is the same day that the game will shut down and disappear forever. You can go to Steam right now and see for yourself that it is 90% off, and the offer ends on September 30th. It's a couple bucks, $4. And then beyond that, you've got other flops like, unfortunately, this sucks, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy was just not a big success. Its sales undershot expectations, even though this game was definitely not bad at all. In fact, many enjoyed it quite a bit. I think it had some refinements to do in terms of gameplay, but I thought it was a really solid foundation and would have loved to see a sequel. That's probably not going to happen. Then there's Babylon's Fall, which shut down on February 27th, 2023. This was among the biggest flops that Square Enix has seen in recent memory. And then we have, of course, the infamous Forspoken, whose launch sales were lackluster by Square Enix's own admittance. So much so, in fact, that the development studio Luminous Productions was merged into Square Enix. Luminous, which made Final Fantasy XV, as well as Forspoken, is now no more. So yeah, this has kind of been the downward spiral that Square Enix's releases have been going through. And now fast forward to the most recent current events, and we're in a situation where investors have lost so much confidence in Square Enix's ability to deliver consistently well-selling products that the company has plunged by 30% when it comes to its market price, and that may just be the beginning. And a 30% drop means that nearly $2 billion of Square Enix's value was wiped away from the company since the launch of Final Fantasy XVI. That is a substantial nosedive, enough that investors are wondering whether Square Enix is done for, whether one of the games industry's most remarkable runs is coming to an end. And it's a combination of Final Fantasy XVI sales underwhelming in the eyes of investors and in the eyes of Square Enix not meeting those high-end expectations. And those looking from the outside in believe that all of this offers hard lessons for the industry about the importance of quality control and product planning, which Square Enix is admittedly not been consistent at. Bloomberg took a quote from Tokyo-based developer and gamer Michael Prefontaine, who said that the company has overstretched itself on too many titles without proper oversight, which is how we get titles like Marvel's Avengers and Forspoken and the Dio Field Chronicle, all of which underwhelmed both critically and commercially. Bloomberg even spoke to current and former employees who said that they pinned the blame for all of this on the company's approach of making every game project a single producer's fiefdom. Producers are given full reign over the scope and direction of projects, and there's a shortage of proper documentation and team structure. And according to contractors, there's disorganization that comes about because of an ad hoc process where project goals can shift without warning, and the outcome of all of this is a high degree of volatility in the quality of the final product of many of Square Enix's games, such as multi-million-dollar flop Forspoken. That game was in development for a while. There's probably a whole story about how that development process went, because for a game that was in development for that long, its quality did leave a lot to be desired. Now, Square Enix did recently appoint a new CEO, Takashi Kiryu, who said he intends to whittle down the number of smaller titles and decrease outsourcing to focus on big-budget games with higher potential to improve the company's profitability. Hopefully, this means less focus on things like mobile games and NFT projects that are not what fans are looking forward to from a Square Enix title, and more of a focus on quality beyond the Final Fantasy IP. You know, like FF14's doing really well, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is in development. That's probably going to sell pretty well. FF16 sold well enough, but Final Fantasy alone can't carry Square Enix to success. They need a number of IPs and franchises to be successful, and for that to happen, analysts believe that Square Enix needs to start altering internal practices to ensure that new IPs like Forspoken don't flop on the level that they did. There's a general sentiment that Square Enix's inability to spark a third major franchise beyond Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest is key to all of the skepticism surrounding the company, especially from investors. And that lack of quality control means that new IPs like Forspoken aren't able to really impress and make a dent and really take off and establish itself as an IP that can see a healthy future, long-term future. And then beyond that, Square Enix's attempts to mitigate their AAA game sector failures with mobile titles like the mobile Final Fantasy VII game that launched sometime in early September, whose sales fell short of investor expectations, only makes matters worse. The amount of confidence lost on the investor side of things means that Square Enix's stock have lost about 30% from its peak this year, and on Wednesday was on track to close at its lowest since May last year. There's this consistent gradual decline on the part of Square Enix that doesn't paint a bright long-term picture for a company that seems to be struggling to compete with other publishers. We're seeing plenty of other news outlets reporting on this, like IGN, who tweeted, Square Enix has lost nearly $2 billion since June when Final Fantasy XVI launched, and a new report cast doubt on if the company will be able to recover. Now, some people took umbrage with this title as it implying that Final Fantasy XVI was the reason that Square Enix lost $2 billion in value, as if to imply that the game sales were so poor that it impacted the company that much. And people have kind of put community notes saying that the $2 billion loss in value is due to the poor results of Square Enix's previous games, not Final Fantasy XVI, which, yeah, but had Final Fantasy XVI been overwhelmingly successful rather than, okay, it did pretty well, then maybe investor confidence would have grown. It selling well enough was just not good enough, it would seem. It had to do more than well enough. But yeah, I think this headline maybe is a more accurate take. Successful Final Fantasy XVI fails to save Square Enix 2023 fiscal year from disaster following Avengers and Forspoken. If anything, Square Enix relying on Final Fantasy XVI to carry them through this fiscal year, like, that's on them. The game did sell well, but by Square Enix standards and what they required on a corporate level, that's where Final Fantasy XVI didn't make up for their previous failures. But all of that's more representative of Square Enix's inability to deliver on their other non-Final Fantasy projects. With how badly games like Marvel's Avengers and Forspoken did, there was no way that Final Fantasy XVI was ever going to be their savior. And while Final Fantasy XVI did sell well within that first week, Square Enix wanted to see the game sell consistently throughout the course of weeks and months following launch. And according to IGN sources familiar with the performance of Final Fantasy XVI, those sources confirmed sales had slowed considerably since launch, but the game was not yet considered a disaster. So again, it sold well enough. It was not a flop, but it was not the massive success that Square Enix was hoping this would be to compensate for their past failures, which again, that's all on Square Enix for their inability to deliver and for their, poor planning on things. Like 3 million units sold for a PlayStation 5 exclusive within a week is objectively good results, but things become more subjective when you're a company who needed this game to perform at a certain level to make up for certain things and meet certain quotas. From a corporate perspective, a game can do really great numbers and sell millions, but based on how high the corporation itself sets the sales expectations, it can still technically be considered a flop, which is crazy. Now again, Square Enix is not deeming Final Fantasy XVI to be a sales flop. In fact, recently, Square Enix president Takashi Kiryu, when answering a question during a Q&A segment of a recent financial results briefing, the question was, initial sales of Final Fantasy XVI were 3 million units. How did that compare to your expectations, and how do you plan to expand sales going forward? The response was, this achievement was in line with our expectations. It didn't meet high-end expectations, but in line with their expectations. To expand sales, we have planned a variety of PR activities and other initiatives to encourage more of the growing PlayStation 5 install base to play the title. And beyond that, it's worth noting that Square Enix is currently working on 2 paid DLC expansions for Final Fantasy XVI and confirmed a PC port was officially in development. So they're definitely planning to find ways to extend the longevity of the game's sales. And once it comes out on PC, that's a whole new audience base, a whole new player base that will get to buy this game, and that might increase sales even further. And that could, over the long term, if Square Enix handles this right, end up with Final Fantasy XVI becoming a fairly successful, more high-end of sales expectations when it comes to sales kind of a product for Square Enix. But as of right now, Square Enix has got too many underwhelmingly launched projects and too many poorly managed projects that Final Fantasy alone can't pick up the slack for it to be considered in a healthy state. Thank God they have Final Fantasy XIV to bring in a steady revenue flow, and they do have, new expansions coming out like Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail. You got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There's some new Dragon Quest stuff, and there's some upcoming games, but you can see there's Project Hikari, whatever this is, but this is VR, so that's not going to be like a huge seller. There's also Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts 4 is going to be a major release, no doubt, but an over-reliance on these IPs whose mainline titles take so long to make, again, whether that's sustainable over the long term, is, that's something that's being called into question. Square Enix either needs to become much more focused on what they specialize in, or if they do decide to expand to other IPs, they really need to nail those and make a strong impression so that those IPs can be sustainable and viable and welcomed over the long term. And that way they have more options rather than putting all of their eggs in just the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and Kingdom Hearts baskets. But yeah, that's everything you need to know about the current state of Square Enix and what general sentiments are surrounding the company's current status and its ability to maintain itself over the long term. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on all of this, and whether you think that Square Enix can recover from this and how you think they should go about doing so. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.